this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin. Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. You ever think about the term eradication? I have on a couple of points along the continuum in my journey. I think most of us think about it when we have some kind of, animal population that's creating havoc, or maybe some type of weed. We want to eradicate it, get it away, because for whatever reason we perceive that thing to be bad. But when that term is applied to a group of people, specifically to a family, it takes on a much more sinister meaning. Today I've got an update for you. An update in regards to a case that I have been covering now these many years, I guess since 2017, maybe even 16. What I'm talking about is the Piketon Massacre. And one of the principals involved in that case, one Billy Wagner, the patriarch of the family. And what has come to light in the last few days, although not necessarily shocking, I can say as someone that has followed this case, it's less than satisfying. Coming to you from the studios at Jacksonville State University, this is Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, I have drug you down the rabbit hole, haven't I, brother? This case. And the thing about it is, anytime I talk about the Piketon Massacre, I'm still amazed to this day that so few people are familiar with it. Even though, it has been a podcast from my friends at KT Studios, the number one podcast for a while in the country. And I participated in a television program on Oxygen in regards to it in 2023. But still, not a lot of people know about it. It hasn't gotten into the bloodstream, if you will, I think, in the true crime community the way other cases have, that in some cases only involve a single victim. Dave, we're talking about an entire family here. We're talking about a family of 8 that were brutally butchered on one night in 4 separate locations. And still to this day, after all these years, I still can't get my mind around it, how anybody could do this. But just so folks understand this, and I didn't think I'd ever use this term, this octuple homicide is the largest mass murder in the history of Ohio. The largest. Ohio's been around for a long time, and there's been a lot of violence that's come out of Ohio. Murder, Inc. was based out of Cleveland, Dave. So, back during the gangster days,
Wow.
And this is the largest mass homicide trial or case in Ohio history.
You mentioned that it goes back to 2016. This didn't happen just yesterday. It happened in 2016, and it took 2 years before they ever effected an arrest. But how is it that you have 8 members of one family, the Rhoden family, in a very specific area that get wiped out in an overnight period of time, April 21st, 22nd, 2016? They get totally destroyed. It wasn't by fire. It wasn't by flood. It wasn't by earthquake. how were these people killed, and in what order were they? Do we know who did this and why?
We actually do, because of the testimony of Jake that was offered up. Jake Wagner, he allocated to this. Essentially, it wasn't a pure allocution like BTK did, but it was him laying out the timeline and laying down everything that had happened before, during, and after. And, Dave, you were talking about, and I appreciate your kind words about, me, running my mouth all over the place about forensics and whatnot. But I actually kind of went into default mode when I began to look at this case or cases so many years ago, and began to think about the military at that moment in time more than I ever did about forensics, because I was thinking who could actually pull something in the execution of this case. Who in the world could actually pull this thing off? And for a long time, I think that many people, and I'm not talking about law enforcement here, I'm just talking about many people out there that were casual observers, thought that this was probably a cartel hit, because this thing had to be pulled off with a certain amount of synchronicity. Because you've got 4 separate scenes in one night, and 2 of the scenes are immediately side by side. The senior Rhoden, the dad of the Rhoden family, their patriarch, if you will, he essentially was killed in his trailer, along with, his cousin, who was actually staying there with him. And that'd be Gary. And Gary would come in and do day labor with Chris at this kind of campground he worked at. They'd push dirt around and do landscaping and all that sort of thing. They were killed first, and then of course the trailer of Clarence Frankie Rhoden, who was 20 years old. This is the son of Chris Rhoden Sr. His trailer was immediately next door, to Chris Sr.'s trailer. And just as an aside, as we've talked about before, these trailers were actually removed from the scene, which is something I've never seen. This is another first for me.
Yeah, we're going to have to come back to that in just a minute. After you lay out the rest, we'll come back to why the trailers were removed.
Yeah.
Because I'm
one of the most poignant things, I think, particularly as a papaw now, that always just brought a tear to my eye. Every single time I've been there, I've seen this, and it's still there. They've got those old wooden steps that are, prefabbed, that are, you push them up to the main entrance of the trailer. Right. Trailer's up on blocks. And Dave, there's still children's toys sitting after all these years. I was up there in 2023, I think, was the last time I was up there. And Dave, those plastic toys were still sitting on the stoop.
7 years after the murders.
Yeah, that those babies had played with, in that house, and or one of the children, because you remember the one child that was the child of Frankie Rhoden and Hannah Gilly. That's the young child. I think he was 3 or 4. He came to the door when the aunt came by to check and find out where everybody was. And the little boy came up to the door, opened the door for his aunt and looked at her and said, "Mommy and Daddy are playing zombie." And they were dead in the bed, and there was a baby in between them, still alive, covered in his parents' blood. The little boy had been sleeping on the sofa in the front room. And so, geographic proximity, going back to my point about the military, this thing had, it smacked of almost this military precision, or an attempt at military precision, with the proximity to Chris Sr.'s trailer, Frankie's trailer, and then, back down the road, it feels like a good strong driver from the white tees on a golf course to Dana's house. Now, this is a house that Chris Sr. had built for his ex-wife. That's the kind of relationship they had.
Mhm.
And it was a mobile home or modular home that had add-ons done to it. And the yard was neat as a pin, unlike Chris's, by the way, that had old junked out cars in it and everything. Dana's house was beautiful, though. It had a standalone garage. It had been added on to. You had, 3 more deceased in that house, including a baby that was not deceased but still alive, that Jake later said that he was afraid the baby was going to starve to death. So this is so bad to say, but he had actually exposed the breast of Hannah Rhoden, and placed the baby adjacent to her breast so the child could suckle during the night. He said, "I didn't want the baby to starve." Yeah. It's the ultimate in callousness. And then, of course, later on, Kenneth Rhoden is found some distance away. So, I
But
guess
Kenneth
it's probably
Rhoden, wasn't he one of the guys that came in and was like, he had a little camper trailer?
Yeah, he did. And he had his own little, this whole thing they thought was drug related.
Right. He had a marijuana grow thing going on, didn't he?
He did. I mean, Chris had a bigger one. He had the I guess you could call them hot houses that were out back of his structure. But he was accused of other nefarious things, I think, including cockfighting or dog fighting or something like that. And this is not. And granted, the amount of weed that Chris Sr. was growing would not be considered by the DEA as grown for personal consumption. This is something you're going to sell. With Kenneth, he was different. He had like a few plants out there adjacent to, what the Brits call a caravan. It's like a little camper that he had put steps out of, and he was just living. He was a single guy living in this trailer, and he had kids too, but they didn't live there with him. He was a day laborer. He was a hardworking, kind of salt of the earth kind of guy. But they went in. The perpetrators went in this case in order to, eradicate the whole family. And of course, we all know this thing stems from a child custody issue involving, Jake and Hannah Rhoden.
And I think that bears backing up a little bit, Joe, because for those who are not as familiar as Joe and some of the people who have been covering this case since it happened, we've actually been covering the Kansas mom story, which was a double homicide, and it was because of a custody issue of children.
Yes.
And this one is this story in its nutshell, when you mentioned the drugs, because I remember when we first started covering it, looking at all the different things this could have been. You don't have 8 people of one family getting wiped out for no reason. There, and it's usually further beyond something that you would see locally. This is somebody brought, to be as cold-blooded as this, you can't have a relationship with these people. That's what they were thinking. What they found out is that the Wagners were in fact that cold-blooded. And I think you said something to me earlier today when we were talking about this, that the puppet master of all of this actually created it. Here's what we're going to do. Jake was 18 and Hannah Mae Rhoden was 13 when they began dating. All right. They had a baby when she was 15. Now, the families were just fine with them being together and being a couple and having a baby at that age. But Hannah Mae Rhoden had her fill of Jake, didn't want him anymore, wanted other guys, and she had a baby with another man. Jake didn't like that. He still loved Hannah Mae. When Hannah Mae still wouldn't take him back, even after she dumped the guy, she ends up dating another man, has a baby with this guy. And it's Jake was in love, and his mama wanted her grandbaby.
Yeah. Isn't that something, Dave? We were talking about, the Kansas mamas. And it would seem not the patriarch, but the matriarch in both of these scenarios were, behind this. Angela, kind of pulled the strings, did the planning, bought the infamous shoes from Walmart of all places to go in and, furnish for her boys, for her husband and her 2 sons to wear.
Angela
and
Wagner
utilize.
went and bought shoes for them to walk into the home so they wouldn't be leaving prints of their own.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, we have wear patterns and forensics that we look at, and you're, pronate, supinate, the way your foot strikes the ground is unique to you. And if you don't, if these things are fresh off the shelf and you put them on for this one event, you're not going to have those unique markings. Again, this goes to planning. It goes to planning. It's thoughtful. They're thinking things through here. And I don't know that Billy, who is on trial or will be on trial in January, who has been accused in this case and allegedly, one of the driving forces behind this, I don't know that he had as much to do with this as Angela did as the impetus behind it.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining this sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Angela's a very interesting character because she would, if any of these people were involved in a relationship at all, any of her boys, George resisted this, but Jake would submit, and he would have these women, these girls, if you will, that they'd have to surrender passwords. She would have to have access to these girls' social media accounts. When the Rhodens ran off to Alaska, Jake got involved with a woman up there, and she escaped. And literally, it is framed that way, that she escaped. Angela had demanded all of her social media contacts, and she was living with them. And Jake had said, "Listen, if you don't submit, you're going to die." And that's how chilling this is. So even in the wake of the butchery that they've already committed down in Ohio, they haven't changed their tune.
Hold on a minute, Joe. You just said that Angela Wagner,
yeah,
the matriarch of the Wagner clan,
yes,
orchestrates everything. The death of 8 people, the Rhoden family. They did leave 3 children alive in the massacre that night. But Angela Wagner goes to the store and buys the shoes so that as they walk through the crime scene in blood, knowing they're going to be tracking blood, that they won't leave tracks that can be actually, you can tell that the guy limps on his left leg or something. They being the Wagner family led by matriarch Angela, they head up to Alaska. Are they there hiding out during the investigation? Why were they up in Alaska?
Well, they went up there, and the police had been tracking them the entire time. They went up there to get away from the stir that had been created, and that they were falsely accused.
Oh, that was their thing?
They were lamenting the fact that they were falsely accused. They just wanted to go up there and start a new life. It's not like they moved to another country. They went to Alaska to get up there. I don't know. Maybe they thought that could be validated as opposed to, flying off somewhere that didn't have an extradition treaty.
Which would have...
They could still give the appearance that they were just trying to get away.
Wow.
And, they had gone up there and established, kind of a life up there. It's hard going up there if you don't know anybody and you don't have any marketable skills when you get up there.
Except for growing weed and making moonshine and killing people.
Well, yeah, and I don't know about the moonshine part of it, but yeah, growing weed and dealing, with this level of violence.
Wow.
And now you're going to support an entire family up there. And, things just didn't, I think the wheels fell off,
But
and they wound up coming back to Ohio.
I'm kind of left with this on Jake, though. So Jake and Hannah Mae have a baby. Hannah Mae moves on to other men, and Angela wants her grandson rather. She wants that grandbaby, Jake's son or daughter. Is it a boy or a girl? I'm getting confused. I get confused.
It's a daughter.
Okay.
It's a daughter. Yeah.
All right. So Angela Wagner wants her granddaughter, and Hannah Mae Rhoden has now moved on. She's 2 men removed from dating Jake when she was 13 and 14 and 15. And after the destruction of the Rhoden family in Ohio, in Pike County, Ohio, Angela Wagner, Billy Wagner, and the whole team head up north to Alaska, where they try to establish whatever. And Jake falls for a local girl in Alaska. She is then having to submit to Angela's control to the point where Jake tells her either you do it or you die. And she's able to escape the clan, and they move back to Ohio. Is that fairly close to what happened?
Yeah, that's yeah. And so the way that happened with this young lady, she had actually gone to a parking lot at a shopping center and escaped after getting a message out to a relative who picked her up and spirited her away. And, this is, I don't know. You begin to think about how dark this whole thing is, and you think about the level of evil that's involved here, and you want to hold somebody responsible. But here's the thing, Dave, looking at this case, I think that, for what does remain of the Rhoden family, maybe at this point they're ready to be done with it. Maybe at this point, they want to see justice served in whatever manner is going to come about. But I do know this, Billy Wagner, who is the patriarch of the Wagner family, he is going to stand in court. He's going to appear in court. He's going to listen to all of these witnesses be paraded off that stand over and over and over again. But he's not going to have to pay the ultimate price here. But I don't know, maybe there's some comfort in the fact that, he's got 8 murder charges hanging over his head, including, I think, 22 other, charges, including weapons, I think, and falsification and all kinds of other stuff. He's going to not see the light of day. But here's the thing. Even at the conclusion of that, Angela Wagner is only going inside for 30 years. Only going inside for 30 years. And she cut that deal. Billy, her husband, who, they were, to say estranged was probably an understatement, but still within that nuclear family, as weird as it was, they had a life together with their kids. One kid, George, was essentially non-compliant, but he was drawn back into this and participated that night back in April of 2016. Jake, who winds up being the major trigger puller in this case and who literally shot the mother of his child right in the face, he's in for life. But Billy, it remains to be seen what shall happen with this man. But I know this, there's never, getting the Rhodens back. There's never reclaiming that bucolic life that they had up there in that beautiful area of Ohio. And for the children that are left behind, it's going to be something that will be spoken of in whispers for years and years and years to come. Kids up in that region 100 years from now will sit around campfires on camping trips and tell ghost stories about the Wagners and the Rhodens, because it has scarred that community. We might not know much about it in the news all over the country, but it has left a deep scar.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn sensational.
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining this sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
They entered into a, let's face it, it's a criminal conspiracy. You've got Angela, and you've got her husband, and the other two, George and Jake, and then there's two other peripheral family members that were charged with making false statements. But the four that are really kind of focused on here, had a hand in this. Now, Angela obviously didn't go out that night. Guess where she was? She was back at her house taking care of Sophia. The 4-year-old was in her care that night, Jake's daughter that he had with Hannah Rhoden. And interestingly enough, that child had been spirited out of that home because that same night when they descended upon Dana's house where Hannah Rhoden was staying, that's her mama's house, along with her 16-year-old brother who was also executed in that same house. Sophia would have been in that house as well with her baby sibling. And that child conveniently was not there. That child was in possession of Angela Wagner that night. So it was all planned out. It was all planned out, and the prize was Sophia. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Billy went out with his two sons to perpetrate this crime. They'd even created a false bed in the back of a pickup truck so that you could not see occupants of that vehicle, that it would just give the appearance that there was only one person rolling up. He went up onto Chris Sr.'s stoop, drew him to the door to talk to him under the pretense of a business arrangement. And, George, the son, was supposed to have let loose with SKS, shoulder-fired weapon, and he froze. And it's at that moment in time that Jake takes over. Jake takes over, and he begins to fire. And he and his father went into that trailer and executed. And as a matter of fact, Billy was heard to say it through tears, "I've just killed my best friend." And their bodies were drugged. Their bodies, being Chris Sr. and his cousin, were both drugged back into that back bedroom from the front, and then covered with bedclothes back there in the back. And then they go on to the next trailer and wipe out that family.
Wait a minute.
He
kills his best friend, Chris. They drag Chris and who else was in there?
It was actually his cousin Gary.
Okay, that's
who worked with Chris on a regular basis. He would come in. Now, he lived part of the time down in Kentucky. Both these families had relations in Kentucky because we're not right on the Ohio River, but we're within 90 miles of it. It's an easy trip. You got people that cross the river regularly up into Ohio from this region, and it's Appalachia.
Okay.
Don't make no mistake about it. When you see it, it all looks the same.
Yeah.
Kentucky, northern Kentucky, and southern Ohio, down in that portion of the country, looks a lot. It looks virtually the same. Low-lying green, rolling pastures and low-lying hills and that sort of thing. And people are isolated down there. That was one of the things about this case, Dave, was the fact that there was a lot of talk of drug cartels and all these sorts of things in the beginning, and you would specifically have to know the inner workings of these families and what their attachments would be to an organization that had come up out of the South, like out of Mexico. We're going to take our pound of flesh. And I've heard other people say this. All right. Now, granted, I've never worked for the DEA. I've worked drug hits before, organized drug hits, and everybody in the house got killed. My understanding is that if it had been a drug cartel that had perpetrated this, there would not have been anybody that survived. And that gives you real insight into this, that they would kill all of the adults, but spare the babies. Well, why would you do that? Why would you spare the babies? In this case, you've got 2 or 3 children now. Frankie had 2 children. He had a very young child that actually still slept in the bed with he and his wife, Hannah Gilly. And then you had their other child, little boy, that was sleeping on the sofa, that arguably bore witness to this.
Wow.
He probably saw them come through the house, but they were not going to subject that child to testimony on the stand.
Too young.
And Sophia, who was in the care of her grandma, she was 4 at that time, Dave. That was in 2016. So now she's in a spot now in her life, and she's being taken care of, but she's in a spot in her life where she knows things. She's heard things, and, thinking that she's still living there and that she hasn't been sanitized by moving her away, and every relation she's ever known is forgotten. She's going to hear about this, and this is going to mark her for life. But yeah, Billy led the charge on this. He was all in on planning. I went by their house, by the way, by the Wagner home. And it's this kind of, I don't know how to describe it to you. It's kind of an old, it looked like a 2-story old Victorian style home that had pasture land around it. It would be an enviable home, if you didn't know what had occurred there.
So Billy Wagner didn't have a trailer?
Billy did, and he had essentially moved away from the family, but they would all gather there. So he and Angela were kind of on the outs by this point in time, but they were still in this confederacy together. And here's another little factoid that, I may have failed to mention. According to what I have heard, Billy's rather simple-minded, and Angela ruled the roost when it came to him. And she loved and adored baskets. And forgive me if I've already told this story, but I was fascinated by this. It kind of gives you an insight into psychology, I think, to a great degree. Billy was famous for his temper, flying off the handle, shouting, screaming, threatening, breaking things, all that sort of thing. And every time he would have a fight with Angela, he would go out and he would buy her a basket. And guess what Angela would do? She would take that basket into her kitchen and place it on the wall. And from what I understand, within that kitchen, adjacent to the little table that they all sat around and planned this horrific acts, the walls were festooned with baskets, each basket being emblematic of some kind of fight that both Billy and Angela had at some point in time. Look, man, the psychopathology in this thing runs so deep. I don't know that we could even begin to plumb the depths of it.
Wow, Joe, that's so unhealthy. My gosh, it's so weird. I don't have the vocabulary, but
yeah, it's
earlier
it's
we were talking about
thing.
the trailers, and we were also talking about, in this particular case, for the first time in your career, they actually sealed up the trailers and moved them to a building so they could take them indoors, so they could study the actual crime scenes, because all of these murders took place inside the homes, right? Inside the trailers.
Yeah.
So they basically,
there was nobody that was,
they're wrapping up the crime scene and taking it to the lab, pretty much.
Yeah. Minus the bodies.
Right.
And just so you know, these trailers had been here, and I urge anybody to go look this up. Look up the images and you'll see what I'm talking about. They're out there. All you got to do is, put in, Wagner crime scene, or Rhoden family crime scenes, and you'll see these dwellings that are there. And Dave, these things have been, they've been hardened in these locations. They're plumbed.
Mhm.
This is not like an RV trailer.
Right.
These are mobile homes, and they've been there for years. They had to go to great lengths to get these things mobile again. And then on top of that, not just to get them mobile, but to get them out. I'm thinking right now of Frankie's trailer and Chris Senior's trailer, because they're cluttered with cars, car parts, all kinds of junk out in the yard. They had to hook these things up, get them road ready in order to tow them out of these locations, to take them. The place that they took them to looked to me like an old blimp hangar.
Mhm.
It was big, it was that size. And I don't know how much more you could study these things there. First off, if you're trying to pull bullet trajectories on this thing, as you all know, mobile home is not like a stick-built home. It moves back and forth. So just a few millimeters of movement in this thing as it's going down the road, and you don't know how sound these things are anyway, because they've been in place for years. It's going to throw it off, throw your measurements off. So I never could really understand what the rationale was for securing the scenes, and why they would do that. It didn't necessarily make sense to me at the time. And it's still, to a great degree, doesn't make sense, and it doesn't have to make sense to me. It was an odd thing. I've never seen it happen. And look, I've worked a lot of homicides in mobile homes over the years. I never recall ever having removed a mobile home from a crime scene at all. But it's kind of bizarre. It's one of those little instances with these cases that's such an oddity compared to all other things, that you work in, what we might call, I'm doing air quotes here, in normal circumstances. There are really no normal circumstances in any death investigation, but this one, as I think you would admit, is kind of over the top. And then to have the mobile homes removed, you have to get them road ready. That means you're cutting power, you're disconnecting the plumbing, everything that goes along with this, and then getting all of that debris out of the way to pull it down a road. And Dave, this road that these homes were on, the three primary scenes, and then you've got the brothers at 7 miles away. Dave, this is farming roads. It's blacktop, but the production team and I, when we were going out there to shoot on site, we had to pull over in order to let other traffic come through. So you can imagine if some guy in the springtime's coming through there with his tractor,
Wow.
There's not a lot of room. If some guy's hauling a plow behind, his John Deere, going down the road, you might even have to back up in some spots. So it's just the idea of pulling these very delicate structures down the road, and turning those really tight curves to get it to this location. I just hope, and I guess they did an effective job, because George's case saw a conviction.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be interested to see how this is approached in Billy's case. And by the way, we have no idea where this case is going to be tried yet. We know that it's going to be tried in January, but we don't know where it's going to be tried because the judge hasn't named it yet.
The one fascinating thing that you brought up that at first I thought that's a cool idea to take the trailers in. Okay. In my mind, that's what I was thinking. And that's why I asked you about it. I didn't realize the movement. I didn't think about the movement of the walls and things like that are built to move like that. So you can tow a trailer and put it. It's why it's called a mobile home. You can move them. There's not a thing in the world that they could not have done in terms of sealing up the crime scene out at the location. They could have done all of it out there on site without moving a thing. And I wonder what the explanation is now. I'm curious. I thought it was a great idea at first. Now I'm like, that was not smart.
Well, I don't know. And I don't know if it's going to make a dime's worth of difference, going down the road. But it's certainly something. Look, I tell you this, here at Jacksonville State, when I'm lecturing and I'm talking about crime scene investigation, this case will be cited. And no, I mean, just from the perspective of just teaching young minds that want to go into forensics, field forensics in particular. What do you guys think about this? Tell me the upside and the downside relative to this, and what do you see are problems that you might incur? And is I guess the big question is, you always have to take it on balance relative to what are you gaining by doing this? Is there something that you're going to gain by removal of these structures to another location? And look, I mean, I've cut the walls out of houses. I've taken up carpet, flooring, taken appliances. We do that all the time, particularly when we've got cases of dismemberment or, something like that. Wow. And that happens, back to the Kansas moms, they brought that freezer, into the ME's office there in Oklahoma City. Yeah, I mean, you got to do that. We're talking about a home.
Right, a whole home, not just a
homes,
freezer.
plural.
Yeah,
not just a freezer. We're talking about homes. And Angela's house was kind of interesting because it appeared more to me like a modular home. Like it was, and I think maybe my eyes were deceiving me because there were add-ons to it that give it the appearance of like a home, with like an A-frame roof on the back side of it and that sort of thing. And then a garage that's off to the standalone garage. Wow. So yeah, this case is fascinating in that sense. I'm going to be fascinated to watch beginning in January as to how they're going to utilize this evidence in the presentation of the defense of Billy. Are they going to try to attack it in any way? Because look, they've had an opportunity to learn. The defense has had an opportunity to learn about this case. Is there a chance that he could wiggle off the hook here?
Wow. Yeah,
I suppose there is, but probably not. And I think, again, I know I'm kind of all over the board here, but I think, again, this goes to why they want to move the trial. They're saying that it's too many people have heard about this case in Pike County. Pike County is a tiny place. Too many people have heard about it that would be on the jury. And as you well know, you go to small rural town or county, and everybody's met you at one point in time. And many people are kin to one another. They talk about that. What's that old game, 6 Degrees of Separation, from Kevin Bacon or whatever it was. There's fewer than 6 degrees of separation here. We're just talking about a couple degrees of separation. And that's going to be, the dynamic that they're looking at. That's why the judge agreed to change venues here, why they're going to move this thing. I just don't know. I don't know if they're going to move it to a county of equivalent size and demographic. Or are they going to take it up the road to Columbus? Or are they going to go all the way over to Cincinnati to facilitate this? Columbus is not that far. Cincinnati is a couple of hours. When I flew in, every time I flew into Columbus, which is north of Pike County, and, just took a car south. Cincinnati is a bit more of a push. And so when judges do these sorts of things, they have to take into account a lot. First off, are you going to be able to get the witnesses there? Do they have the means to get there? And then if they have to be there multiple days, can you house these people? And so it's a huge expense. They spent more. What's his name? I think DeWine was the attorney general at that time. He's now the governor. They had to draw in resources in order to facilitate the processing of all of this evidence. This has cost the state an incredible amount of money over all these years. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bag.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.